Time once again for this is segment 3 of Tri-City Sports Now. Also, we're talking about Drew Richmond left for Southern California. One more bit of news: the details of Dabo Swinney's contract came out. I keep mixing up Dabo Swinney and Dabo Samuels. You know, I do. Forgive me. I mean, I know the difference between them. Trust me. I'm going to get to Dabo Samuels here in just a sec. Dabo Swinney, huge new contract, extra harsh penalty if he leaves for Alabama. I've said this before. I've thought that, let's say Jeremy Pruitt does turn it around at Tennessee. Let's say he beats Alabama. I mean, let's say he sends Nick Saban into retirement. Do you think then that when Tennessee, will keep him when Nick Saban leaves? That's one of the, things about hiring. And really, I thought the same thing. If Derek Dooley had been a successful coach at UT, it wasn't only a matter of time before Georgia, after he beat the Bulldogs, said, hey, why don't you come here? And he was going to leave. So some of these hires that UT has made, I don't necessarily get. Anyway, Swinney, the conference that he went to, let's just give you this, or the contract, you heard about it. We talked about it on Friday, 10 years, $93 million. Thank you, Jackie Sherrill. It's a historical note right there. Sherrill was the first coach that was university. But anyway, there are a lot of buyout play. They didn't want Rick Barnes because they couldn't come the $5 million buyout. That was just too much for him. Same thing, Jamie Dixon. Well, it could be as much as $6 million to get Swinney from Clemson to go to Alabama if and so he ever desires. That's the way the buyout is through next year. If Nick Saban says, my hip, I can't continue this. However, it does reduce as time goes by. In fact, after 2025, the buyout is only $1 million or $1.5 million. Of course, by that time, my guess is that there'll be an extension. If Swinney is 49, let's say he is the Clemson coach for the next 10 years and such, which, it seems like a pretty good bet there. I would imagine that come the next decade, he's going to get an extension. You always want to give your contract 4 years for your football coach and all this. And then they'll, increase the buyout as it sees fit. And then you'll get the idea of right there, as it becomes closer to perhaps a time where Nick Saban might be retiring, that, and he's 67, that maybe then Clemson will say, yeah, we'll give you all the money you want, but we're going to increase this buyout as well. So what does this buyout all mean? People wanted to know what it meant. Right now, I would say, well, he's not going to go initially, but yeah. Now, with that buyout, like I said, this creates a worst-case scenario for Tennessee, in my opinion, because the idea is, that if Alabama would ever need a coach, they want someone who's successful. And if Swinney is going to be too expensive and continues to win, well, what if Jeremy Pruitt starts to win? Now, they won't want him if he's 5-7, and if he keeps going 5-7, Vols fans, you won't want him either. But if he starts to win, so the Vols go 8-4 and on to bigger and better things in the future, let's say they knock off Alabama in a future season. Remember what happened, and I know that to some people this is ancient history, but, John Majors was entranced at Tennessee. Then he had bypass surgery. Phil Fulmer came in, won 3 games, including Florida. Then John Majors came back, lost 3 games, all by a single score, 2 by 1 point, 1 by a touchdown to eventual national champion Alabama. Because of those 3 close losses, Majors was sent packing to the University of Pittsburgh. And Phil Fulmer was brought in. And the idea was, well, wait a minute, Fulmer is the frisky young colt. We need him. We need to be ahead of the curve. Somebody else will take him if we don't hire him. It doesn't matter if Majors is the greatest living figure in the history of the program. You get the idea that that would be the mindset at Alabama if Tennessee ever started beating Alabama, especially with Swinney and the contract and what he's being paid and such. So just that also came about, thought that it was worth being, having some conversation. We are going to we're not going to talk to Jerry Bonkowski at 1. He had a memorial service he had to attend to. I'll talk NASCAR at 1 a little bit. Want to talk a lot about the NFL draft, certainly. We also want to, but we will talk to SoCon John Hooper at 1:30. You know, the Maladen Armas transfer, Brian Nolan staying. What else is going on in the SoCon? I was quite upset that the SoCon did not have one player drafted in the NFL draft. Not one player. Now, the SEC people are real excited because they got 64 players taken in the NFL draft. SEC. Alabama had the most, 10, followed by Ohio State with 9, Oklahoma and Washington, 8. Georgia, they had 7. Texas A&M had 7. Auburn had 6. So did the national champion Clemson. Notre Dame, which didn't deserve to be in the national title playoff. They lost to Clemson 30-3. And, oh, wait, Alabama also lost to Clemson by a lopsided score. Maybe we spoke too soon. Notre Dame had 6 players drafted. Ole Miss had 6. No Tennessee players, third time in 5 years. No Virginia Tech players. That's the one that I'm real surprised about, because Virginia is producing a lot of football players. How many football players? Well, we'll put it this way. Virginia was the 6th most prolific state for putting players into this year's NFL draft. Actually, they were tied with Louisiana and Mississippi, which per capita does it like nobody's business. The NFL draft, remember 2 years ago, Georgia led the way, but this year, more traditional, it's Florida. They had 33 players selected. Texas had 27. California had 21. Georgia had 14. Ohio had 13. That's the 5th most from the Buckeye State. Louisiana, Mississippi, and Virginia all tied for 6th with 10 players selected. But then a bit of hope, perhaps, for Tennessee Volunteers fans. Or for that matter, fans of Memphis and Middle Tennessee State, which, by the way, is getting a pretty quality women's basketball player. I'll tell you about that here in a sec. And, let's see here, MTSU, Vandy, and Memphis, as well as Tennessee, because Tennessee was tied with Alabama and Washington, and there were 6 players from the state, not the university, but the state, that went in the NFL draft. So that they were tied for 13th. And the most amount, but 6, okay. Tied with Alabama, Washington, Tennessee. After that, tied at 16th most prolific state putting players in the NFL draft. And I will say this until the cows come home. This is what counts. It's not the recruiting rankings. Recruiting rankings really are just, we're picking you to win. This is where the bread and butter is. This is the final tally, folks. So, maybe those recruiting classes that Butch Jones brought in that were ranked, say, number 5 in the country. Oh, they're doing pretty well. One of those players, Dwayne Hendricks, just signed a free agent contract. I'll tell you about that in the next segment. Of course, he did it out of the University of Pittsburgh, but, how closely Missouri and Tennessee are aligned in that SEC East race thing. Pennsylvania, that's down for them. Utah and Oklahoma all produced 5 players in this year's NFL draft. That's the top 20. Florida, Texas, California, Georgia, Ohio, Louisiana, Mississippi, Virginia, North Carolina, New Jersey, Illinois, Alabama, Tennessee, and Washington, each with 6, and then with 5, Arizona, Missouri, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, South Carolina, and Utah. Now, I mentioned all this. What does this all mean? By the way, New York and Michigan, not in the top 20, despite the fact they're in the top 10 in population. And I talk a lot about the cultures of basketball. I mean, you think about it, New York City ought to be producing football players, right? They used to. I mean, Artie Donovan was from the Bronx. That's a way, way back. But, 7 blocks of granite era, all that. Fordham was a power. Well, that's, everybody's dead now from that era. But the point here going is that New York and Michigan, they're not producing, despite the fact they've got a lot of people there. And I think a lot of that has to do with culture, even political culture. football, and one of the reasons I think that the media comes down on it, yeah, it's very right-wing. It's very conservative. It's a militaristic sport. Basketball, nobody ever speaks ill of basketball. They should, but nobody ever really speaks ill of it. And I think that one of the reasons why is the political leanings of hoops. They're to the left, certainly the NBA is. They pride themselves on being progressive and such. And for that matter, you think of the ball player from New York City, well, he's going to play hoops, right? Not football. Same with Detroit, right? And that's why New York and Michigan not in the top 20 of where the players were drafted from. More on the NFL draft.
Theater